Welcome to the China Summit 2020. I am Andrea, Vice President at GCC NUS Chapter, and I'm honored to be your MC for today. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to express our heartfelt appreciation to all of you here for joining us on this wonderful journey. We hope the 2020 NUS China Summit will be the platform for Singapore's university students and young entrepreneurs to gain a more holistic understanding about the Chinese market. China Summit 2020 consists of 3 sessions, namely Technology and Innovation, which was happening yesterday, and Finance and Investments, as well as the New Normal session. In each session, you will hear from our distinguished speakers talking about exciting experiences and insights they would like to share. To kick off the event properly, I would like to first invite Jia, President at GCC NUS Chapter, to give us a short opening address. Over to you, Jia.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2020 NUS China Summit. Thank you all for joining us on a Saturday afternoon. My name is Jia, and I'm the chairman of Global China Connection and US Chapter. After decades of breathtaking development, China has evolved from isolation to become a pivot in the international arena. And as a result, both the importance and complexity of Singapore-China relationship escalate. Under such circumstances, youth as the future backbone of the society are in a pressing need to be able to navigate and comprehend the virus challenges and opportunities emerging. In 2020, the epidemic of COVID-19 has rattled the world economy and disrupted the normal life of the world. The economic activities faces a lot of uncertainties and challenges from the global spread of the virus. According to business leaders, the epidemic also provides opportunity. The present is the best turning point for China and the whole economy to adjust the strategies and make crucial decisions to recover from the heat of the virus and thrive in the future. As a non-profit student organization, GCC NUS engages Singapore's tertiary school students, young professionals, and entrepreneurs with those from the rest of the world in the context of Singapore-China relationship and the existing and potential opportunities and challenges that Singapore and China are facing. NUS China Summit is an annual event that we organize. For this year, we're so fortunate to be able to invite 3 prominent speakers to the summit, sharing the topic about this new normal. And I'm just as excited as you are to learn from their priceless insights and experiences. Before I finish, on behalf of GCC NUS, I would also like to express the greatest gratitude to our speakers, the organizing committee, and most importantly, the audience today for making this Festival of Ideas possible. Please enjoy the 2020 NUS China Summit. Thank you.
Same excitement here, Jia. Thank you. We hope you now have a better understanding about Global China Connection as an organization. Without further ado, let's kickstart the session. Our topic for today is the new normal. For this session, it is our pleasure to have 3 brilliant speakers with us to share their experiences and insights. During the process, if you have any questions and wish to clarify them with our wonderful speakers, please feel free to post your questions under the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We will answer as many of your questions as possible in a later panel discussion session. Now, let us welcome our first speaker, Dr. Swee Yang, Vice Dean of Global Health Program at School of Public Health, National University of Singapore. Over to you, Dr. Swee.
Thank you very much. And it's my great pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be invited. My name is Yang. I'm an infectious disease physician by training, and I've been asked to talk primarily about the new normal, particularly where it regards healthcare. Now, just like the rest of you, the new normal is quite perplexing to me, and I'm going to make some predictions which I'm sure will be wrong, but feel free to ask me any questions as we go along. Can you see the screen? Okay, great. So I'm going to touch a bit on what's happening in the pandemic currently. Some of you may have been keeping track, but I suspect most of you, like me, find that these numbers get a bit depressing every day, and it's very hard to keep engaged on what's happening in the rest of the world. There's this brilliant website that's called Our World in Data that shows where each country is, and you can just find out by plotting the graphs. So if you look at the confirmed cases of COVID-19 per million, you will see that China is at the bottom of the list, and then Singapore is somewhere above the world's average, and I will talk about that in due course. But when it comes to the deaths from COVID-19, China and Singapore are at the bottom, and unfortunately countries like US and others have some of the highest rates of mortality in the world. So we can say that as of now, China and Singapore have COVID-19 under relative control. In many ways, China has done very well, and Singapore has learned from the published and the spoken experiences of the Chinese professionals. In Singapore, we are just coming out of a rather difficult period. You can see that the charts on the top right-hand corner, which highlights the total numbers, the number in the community, as well as the number amongst the migrant workers in Singapore. Now, Singapore has had several waves of the epidemic, starting first in January, where the first cases came from China and subsequently started little clusters amongst the community here. Then when the virus became more widespread, particularly during the time of the March school holidays in Singapore, we had many returning travelers and countrymen who brought the virus back with them. And this time we were not so good at controlling the spread of the virus, and a large number of cases was found in the community, many of whom we could not find links to existing cases. And what was worse was that from April, the migrant workers became infected. Now, these are our low-wage migrant workers who do the bulk of the work in Singapore, and there are more than 1 million of them in Singapore, of which over 200,000 live in large dormitories where it is impossible for any kind of physical distancing or isolation to be done. And once the virus reached this dormitory, it seemed as though like several explosions went off and the case count went to hundreds every day, a situation that we endured for several months. Then the country went into a lockdown, what is euphemistically called a circuit breaker, where there were significant reductions in movements and interactions for several weeks. And I think most of us still have some degree of a post-traumatic stress disorder from that period. So you will see that from 2nd June, the restrictions have been eased a bit, and slowly Singapore appears to be coming out towards something like what was before. But nonetheless, a lot of restrictions are still in place. In NUS, for instance, there can be no gathering above 50 students, and NUS itself is split into 3 zones, during which the students and the faculty members like myself have to make sure that we don't cross over into the zone or because we risk flouting some rule. And the same thing occurs outside, where the restaurants and other businesses have been hit by the restriction in numbers in order to prevent overcrowding and therefore the spread of the virus. Mask wearing outside is mandatory as well, and perhaps for the foreseeable future, this will be the case. This chart is done by my colleague Alex Cook, who is a mathematical modeler. You can see the different phases in Singapore, and what we have are the mobility profiles, which you can find on Google Map, but which, a Google mobility tracker, but which Singapore tracks as well. And you can see that a lot of people during circuit breaker stayed at home. The mobility decreased significantly, and then essential shopping and work and transport dropped. But in phase 1 and phase 2 of our opening, you can see that they are inching back towards the normal. What this has done so far is to reduce the effective reproduction number, which is the number of people an infected person can pass to less than 1 most of the time. This is an important number because if the effective reproduction number drops to less than 1, then it means that the virus cannot successfully propagate in the community and it must soon die out, which is essentially what happened to China when it locked down Wuhan and it closed all the major cities as well. But I'm reminded of a phrase from the Harry Potter book In one of the books, there is this character called Mad Eye Moody, and he always says constant vigilance. And I think that is the situation that we're facing now. And why we are thinking this is because we see that the countries that were previously successful, like Vietnam, like even New Zealand recently, they have seen new clusters of cases that they could not explain. And it has taken tremendous efforts to shut them down. Even China, after controlling the major outbreak in February, experienced new clusters of cases in April as well as June, and lately also in July. And again, it takes a lot of effort to cut it down. And what that means is that at this point, there is no country, no matter how successful it is in controlling the virus within its own borders, that is able to relax and say, good job, we're done, right? Even if it walls itself off from all the other countries, like what New Zealand did, still there are cases and clusters that may appear. So what does this mean for the future? I think most of us assume that there are three possible pandemic outcome scenarios. The first is that we have an effective vaccine, right? And what by effective I mean is that it will provide protection more than 90% of the people vaccinated, and it produces reasonable long-term multi-year immunity. On the other hand, some of the more pessimistic of us think maybe the vaccine will be less effective. You'll be only about 50% or so protection. And again, maybe we can have immunity that's up to a year or two, and that may well be good enough. The analogous situation is that of the influenza vaccine, where the efficacy fluctuates between 40 to 60%, and everyone gets an annual vaccination if they can. That is the minimum requirement for a less effective vaccine. And finally, there is no effective vaccine at all. I'll repeat again, the statistics of the virus as you know it. Currently, we understand that actually the majority of young and healthy people are actually asymptomatic. And the IFR, which is the fatality rates of the virus, varies between 0.1 to 1, meaning that only about probably less than 1 in 1,000 people who are infected will die from the infection. Children, fortunately for us, appear to be less likely to be infected, and they also have outcomes that are better than the adults. But then recently there have been reports of this multi-system inflammatory syndrome that affects children, particularly in America and parts of Europe, amongst those who are less economically well off or more deprived. And these children have severe outcomes from the multi-system inflammatory response. But thankfully, this syndrome is extremely rare, right? Where we think the world is headed for is that there will be probably a less effective vaccine, and it probably will be a vaccine that will require repeat vaccinations every 1 to several years. The vaccine outlook has been published by the World Health Organization, and here on the top right-hand corner, you can see that there's been a lot of different vaccine types, more than any other vaccine in the past that's been developed. There are different platforms like RNA-based, protein subunit, DNA-based, inactivated virus, which is what China's Sinopharm vaccine is based on, and all other types, right? There's a lot of research and a lot of money poured into developing vaccines. Many of these vaccines have already gone into human trials. Some are already starting phase 3 trials, like a couple of vaccines in China, as well as the Moderna vaccine in the US. And so I think it's very likely out of all this deluge of vaccine trials, we will have a vaccine that will be effective, that will provide some degree of long-term immunity. But that's a postulation at this point, right? The key question that we are working on now is how long does immunity to COVID-19 last? If you look at the spectrum of coronavirus infections, for human coronavirus infections that cause the common cold that spread every winter, what we find is that there is no long-lasting immunity. If I catch the common cold, next year I can catch it again, right? So the immunity is about 9 months, and it wanes over time. But for coronaviruses that have jumped over from humans and caused severe infections, like SARS in 2003, or the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, the immunity seems to be longer lived. And in Singapore, we have found people 10 years, 20 years out from, not 20 years, not that long yet, about 17 years out from their infections, and they're still able to mount an antibody response against SARS. So we think that the most likely COVID-19 or SARS coronavirus 2 will fall somewhere in between, meaning that people will most likely not get lifelong immunity after infection, which means that the vaccine is also unlikely to give lifelong protection, right? So that's the vaccine outlook. Now, on this background then, what is the new normal? So I divide it into two phases. On the left is the pre-vaccine phase, which is where we are now, and there is a lot of emphasis on surveillance and monitoring. And there will be continued emphasis on physical distancing, including wearing masks in public, trying to get people to work from home if they can, and trying to reduce the crowding in common facilities like shopping malls, cinemas, and places like bars may not open for a long time. Travel has certainly been cut tremendously in Singapore, but Singapore, as with many other countries in the world, is a place that depends on travel, and so it cannot be cut off forever, but travel will be reduced for the foreseeable future because of the various policies and the various measures taken to prevent people from spreading the disease to the country that they visit. I mean, if I were going to go to, say I want to take a holiday in Europe, I have to go there and get quarantined 2 weeks, have a holiday, come back and get quarantined 2 weeks again in Singapore. That's 1 month loss. Nobody is going to do that for a short-term holiday, right? So it's currently only urgent needs travel that's happening. And then finally, in the pre-vaccine phase, what we are seeing in Singapore and several countries is a kind of a mass community testing for certain populations. So those workers, for instance, the migrant workers now in Singapore, they all undergo testing every few weeks just to try and catch the asymptomatic cases. And this is going to apply for other categories of workers as well, including those that potentially work with high-risk populations, like the elderly. I think as we ramp up, this may be one way to try to prevent any new clusters from taking place and becoming too big. Post-vaccine, ultimately, it depends on how effective the vaccine is going to be. As I mentioned, I think that the most likely bet is that it is going to be a somewhat effective vaccine with the immunity that doesn't last very long. So almost immediately, what we will see in Singapore, in places like Russia, where it has started already, would be like mass vaccination campaigns to try to vaccinate those who are at highest risk or those who work with others who are at higher risk for the worst outcomes for the virus. And I expect, like you do, that continued physical distancing will happen, but everything else will start to improve in a certain way. There'll be increased travel and less community testing for COVID-19. What this means for the general public, for people like you and I, is that there will be greater intrusion of privacy, or what we define as privacy. Currently, we face it already with the safe entry apps, and there are also Trace Together, which kind of looks at whether we have encountered people who have had COVID-19, right? So apps, if someone has a Trace Together app on his or her phone, and it comes in touch with mine and both are on, then you register that we met. And these apps are being used in many countries and territories around the world as well. The rest haven't changed very much. Working from home will be the new normal. Physical distancing and mask will still continue to be enforced for the large part. And travel, well, it may just take longer than usual, or either that people have to experience having tests done before they leave and after they arrive in the destination country, for instance. That's just to prevent any asymptomatic or subclinical person from bringing the virus around where they go. Whether we will have immunity passports or vaccination certificates, I don't know. This was a major discussion topic, especially amongst the academics, but it's hard to implement this system, right? You can't tell, it's not easy to catch all the fake vaccination certificates and or the immunity passports, and because we don't know how long immunity to COVID-19 lasts, or how to even test for that immunity beyond the antibody test, it's very hard to think about how to implement this in a practical way. So what do I mean by monitoring processes and individual responsibility? This is what's happening in Singapore now, for instance, where every day, or almost every day, there's a lot of public messaging about asking people to minimize unnecessary trips, to maintain physical distancing, to practice strict hygiene, like washing hands regularly, masking up, and so on and so forth, right? The key point of this, which is an important one, is to try to get individuals in the community to minimize the risk of spreading the virus to others. If this goes on for too long, people get fatigued and tired of listening to all these messages. So the public messaging has to change along the way, and there are many clever things that can be done to try to persuade people to carry on wearing the mask a bit more before they get too fed up about it, right? Other than fines, one way of doing it, which has been done here and other places, is to try to get the individual to understand that they are protecting others rather than themselves, and that may help people to practice mask wearing and other things that is quite fatiguing to continue. Other things would be like the balance between lives and livelihood. And we expect as the lockdown restrictions ease, the case count should start to creep up. This thankfully hasn't happened in Singapore yet, but as I mentioned, we see it in multiple other countries. And I don't think in Singapore we can escape from it entirely. And perhaps in a big country, a much bigger country like China, this will be the reality as well, right? So the key will be trying to prevent large clusters in the workplace and general community before it extends beyond where we have to lock everyone down again. And those are the usual measures that we have done. And this chart here, published by the World Economic Forum, just shows what are the different jobs that are high risk, and I'm in one of them, which is that of being a physician, right? How about for the healthcare practice? Let's assume that the COVID-19 infection rate is brought under control indefinitely, which is what is happening now. Still, there is no return to the old normal for healthcare, right? And what is happening in Singapore and what has been exemplified in China is the drive to expand telehealth. The Ministry of Health has pushed this, especially where COVID-19 is concerned, and this has really served as an impetus to move on to new ways of talking to patients and trying to treat them as far as possible. Now, if you come from China or India, this may seem very normal to you, but in Singapore, telehealth was something that was avoided for a long time because of possible legal implications, and no one is sure how to bill correctly for these things, and therefore this thing that is expanding is quite new to Singapore. In primary care, many of you know that the private sector actually commands about 80% of the primary care, whereas the government or the public sector is about 20%. And what we have seen from this pandemic is that there has to be a kind of an increased market share in the public sector for primary care. That's a prediction. I'm not sure whether it will come to pass, but otherwise it is quite difficult to get primary care to all plugged in and have an excellent surveillance system for COVID-19, even in Singapore. And then finally, there's a push for more data and IT and AI to try to diagnose COVID-19, to try to link up all the GP clinics in Singapore, for instance, to get all the data together so that we got a massive system to not only look out for COVID-19, but other clusters and epidemics in the future. So thankfully, healthcare workers will still have jobs, and hopefully this pandemic will make us realize that doctors are not the most important people in the hospitals, that others like nurses, pharmacists are also performing very essential jobs, and perhaps they will get remunerated better. And hospital infection prevention will also go to this new normal, which is a heightened emphasis on preventing infections rather than a kind of a sideline that's been going on for a while. The rest of it is not very remarkable. A lot of clinical education has gone online the same way as university courses have gone online. COVID-19 testing, as I said, will ramp up and may soon be the predominant testing in Singapore for people who want to travel or just to test that they're safe to go back to certain types of work, for instance. And then finally, for my colleagues in the private sector, this hasn't been the best of all experiences for them because for the specialist care in the private sector, a lot depends on volume and also patients from overseas. Very little of which have been forthcoming, and they have been forced to adapt to the circumstances. I want to give one more slide and the last bit about the low-wage migrant workers, because what we have found is that they are actually a vulnerability in Singapore that led to the situation where we are in. And this is not their fault, right? This is not the fault of the migrant workers at all, but it's how we have emphasized less on how they are housed and their healthcare. And it's quite clear from this point that something needs to change. The government has said that it will change the way migrant workers are housed and the way the dormitories are built in the future. I'm sure many of you have not been into a workers' dormitory, and there are literally rooms where about 10 or 20 people are cramped in, and there's one common toilet shared by an entire floor, which can be more than 100 workers, right? So that facilitated the spread of the virus, and now it's made us to rethink how to build these dormitories and how to house them kind of cost effectively and still minimize the outbreak that's going on. Whether we're going to do it or not, I don't know, but Singapore is a good bet on making these things happen if we choose to. So I've come to the end. And I'd like to emphasize again that COVID-19 will be with us for a long time. Many years, it may even become one of the circulating coronaviruses. And it has already changed within this short 8 months, how we work and how we live. Multiple vaccines are likely to be commercialized within the next year or the next 1.5 years. But as I mentioned, they're not likely to be the magic solution, not least because we don't expect them to be so effective. But mass vaccination campaigns are not straightforward. And in many parts of the world, including in the West particularly, there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and many people may not take the vaccine, so you may not even reach herd immunity with the availability of the vaccine. And then finally, the key principle here remains to protect the workers in the community and to prevent large-scale outbreaks, even while restarting and maintaining the economy that we have today. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope I'll be able to answer any questions that you have subsequently.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Swee, for your insightful speech. And we will be having our second speaker, Mr. Jianggan Li from Momentum Works. Jianggan is a founder and CEO at Momentum Works. And over to you, Jianggan.
Hi, good afternoon. So my name is Jianggan, and I run this venture outfit called Momentum Works. But before that, I was CEO for Foodpanda, and before that, I was competing against Grab, running a company called Easy Taxi for 2 years, and that was a tough ride. Anyway, so I think today I would like to talk more from a private sector point of view. I mean, from the businesses, especially Chinese businesses, which, as you all know, have been quite active in this region over the past few years. I prepared a set of slides. I'll go through them, but feel free to ask questions. And I think you have a question tab anytime, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay. Right, this is my last boarding pass. And I was telling my friends that it was on 23rd of January, I think second day or third day of the new year, Chinese New Year. So I was telling my friends that over the last 20 years since I came to Singapore, and I have never stayed in Singapore for more than half a year. And this is the first time. Feels, I mean, initially it felt a bit strange, but over the last few weeks, I feel that I've explored more Singapore than I had over the last 19.5 years, which was quite nice. Lots of nature parks, etc., etc. But I think the disruption of travel is especially troublesome for lots of businesses because I mean we have a team that's spread across many countries, and especially we have some business in Indonesia. And last year I traveled to Indonesia 33 times from Singapore, Jakarta, and this year, not only that I'm not able to go there, but all the staff members in Indonesia have been at home since end of February, and some of them went back to their home city. while I think most of you are in Singapore, you sort of realize that things are relatively under control. People can go out. But I think the situation in Indonesia and in many of the big countries, it's still quite bad. So people still can't expect a normal life, and we don't know how long this is going to last. And from a business point of view, this is very hard because you can't plan. Weirdly, we have a blog called The Lowdown, and on February 4th of February, I wrote a blog entry saying that, hey, 2020 is that year of black swans. That was a time when things were bad in China. I mean, bad in Hubei province specifically, but not yet spread across China. But China imposed a very, very strict lockdown across the country. And I think people from outside China were watching, saying that, okay, what's going on and how bad is it? But people didn't, most people, even some of the business owners around me didn't really expect things to turn so global so quickly. And of course, I mean, from a business point of view, the coronavirus is not the only thing. I mean, there are other things that happened this year, which turned a lot of things upside down and created lots of uncertainty. People have been trying to respond to that, and people have to. Some of the businesses are quite badly affected. Some of them benefited, which I will talk about in a bit. But collectively, I think people are anxious. So are we affected, and how do we respond to that? And how do we deal with the world after this? And also, is there any opportunity that we should seize during this time? Because people always say, right? I mean, in Chinese, like crisis is Weiji, there's always opportunity in it. So I want to talk a little bit about the Chinese companies, the tech companies especially. You think about Alibaba, think about Tencent, think about ByteDance, TikTok, etc., etc. So many of them are trying to, or have been trying to expand out of China, especially since 2016. I'm not sure if you guys know what this map is, but essentially it maps out the population density across the world. And for internet-based businesses, how much population you have in a particular market is very important for you to decide, I mean, whether this market is worth investing in. So you will see that across the world, and you have China, and I assume you can identify where China is, and you have Southeast Asia right below China, very densely populated, especially Indonesia, parts of Vietnam and Thailand. And you have India, you have part of Europe, which is densely populated. Lots of people think about Africa being very populous, but if you look at the continent, the density is very sparse. That created lots of problems for businesses because you don't have the concentration that China has. I mean, if you roll out a service in Beijing, you can reach out to like 20 million people, but in many countries in Africa, even though they're geographically big, very few of them have more than 20 million people. So then you have the US East Coast, quite densely populated. You have Mexico, the Caribbean islands, and we go to Latin America, in South America specifically, you would notice that the population is concentrated around the coast. So this different population concentration would make you think differently and act differently when you plan your business. Because at the end of the day, you want to reach out to the consumers, and consumers with spending power. This is the list of the major Chinese companies which have been expanding outside China for the last few years. I'm not sure how many of these names that you know, but I just want to show you a sense that, okay, many are actually acting on that, expanding globally. Of course, the ones on the top right are the names that everyone knows, like Alibaba, Tencent, Didi, ByteDance, Baidu, Huawei. The ones on the top left are the e-commerce cross-border brands. So lots of companies are using China's manufacturing powers to expand the supply chain and supply goods and across the world. So on the bottom left are the companies that are heavily invested in by Chinese company. I mean, I think in Singapore you would recognize Lazada and Shopee. Lazada is owned by Alibaba, I think 83%, and Shopee is Shopee has its parent company C Group listed in the US, but its biggest shareholder is Tencent. And on the bottom right are the companies which provide services to these companies. I mean, either data, payment, etc., etc. So lots of things going on. And this is a question that people often talk about, like okay, so the population has been reached and there's no more growth. So it's the end of innovation. But what do you see as interesting in China is, I mean, at least in China, is that every wave of innovation, and you have the wave, I mean, with the few business models, they have the mobile internet, where, I mean, people are equipped with smartphones, suddenly have like lots of consumers that you can reach out directly. And even after mobile internet, I mean, because so many people have been connected, you have the data, you have all this infrastructure, I mean, you have created e-commerce logistics, that actually create lots of different business models. So it's waves and after waves of innovation. And that gives people, I mean, kind of confidence that, okay, things have moved very fast in China. And if you look at what's happening in, say, Indonesia, India, many parts of Africa, Middle East, Latin America, lots of things that have been done in China, you don't have equivalent business models there. So that attracts lots of Chinese investors, businesses, and entrepreneurs to those countries. Southeast Asia, it's, I mean, where Singapore is the hub, is particularly favored by Chinese companies, investors, and entrepreneurs. I mean, I've listed a few names on the left. I think there are a few reasons for that. First is that, I mean, it's geographically very, very close. And also culturally very, very close as well. In most Southeast Asian countries, you would have a sizable Chinese community. So that makes people, I mean, culturally more comfortable expanding businesses into Southeast Asia. And also, one thing related to geographical proximity is the time zone. I mean, most Southeast Asian countries are in the same time zone or maximum 1 hour apart from China. So that makes a lot of a psychological difference. I was discussing with a friend the other day, and she was saying that Canada is farther from China compared to Australia. But if you complete the flight time from Beijing to Sydney or to Vancouver, it actually takes more time to go to Sydney. But because Australia is located in similar time zone, so people feel that it's geographically closer. So enter COVID. So this is the map which shows, I think, the infections density. Of course, I don't know the proper word for that, but as you can see, I mean, many countries with large population are particularly badly affected. I mean, you almost have the whole American continent badly affected. We actually have an intern now who's working out of Mexico, because, I mean, we gave her the offer in February. She was supposed to travel to Singapore in May, but because of COVID, and she couldn't travel. And every day she was like updating us about the situation in Mexico, etc. It's pretty bad. And I think, remember the map I showed you just now? People look at business opportunities in countries and continents where there's population density. And on this map, you can see that aside from some parts of Africa, which I think the data is lacking, the tests are lacking, but in most densely populated countries, it's problematic. So you have these things not exactly under control, and that from a business point of view, that almost creates like a parallel world, right? So we sold the business in Indonesia to a Chinese company, and they have not been able since February to go to Indonesia to take over the business. They have to run the business remotely. And COVID is not only thing this year. I'm not sure if you guys, I mean, of course you can recognize the guy on the right, Donald Trump. He has been making lots of headlines, causing trouble to especially Chinese companies' efforts outside China. He's threatening to ban TikTok. He's also threatening to sanction people who are dealing with Tencent. So that creates lots of uncertainty. Of course, the elections are coming, and which means that he might go or he might stay. So, but either way, there's lots of uncertainty, and the current climate is not good. So on the left, it's I think ordinary person in India protesting. So a few weeks ago, India banned 59 apps from China. So that happened after the border skirmishes in the Himalayas a few days before. When that happened, I mean, lots of Chinese companies have invested a lot in India. I think amongst the top Indian internet companies, I think like 70–80% would have Chinese capital, and many are invested by Alibaba or Tencent. So and TikTok has spent billions of dollars in India. It's their biggest market outside China. And when it was first, I mean, when government first said, okay, we would ban on this app, lots of people thought it was joking. No, it was not serious. I mean, after a few talks, they would lift the ban, but the ban is still there. And that makes, lots of investment potentially going down the drain. But that also creates this kind of anxiety in business decision makers. I mean, so in addition to all the business issues that I have to deal with, I have to deal with all this geopolitics, which I think is nothing new, because Western companies have had consultants, have had methods, frameworks to deal with that for years, and lobbyists, of course. So we look at a few deeper issues of these companies. So of course, I mean, you have the politics, you have the political, whatever. But for many Chinese, especially tech companies, these companies are young. So they became very successful in China over a very short period of time. And that creates problems when they try to expand outside China in a different market. So I'm actually in the process of writing a book with a professor from INSEAD on a topic of Chinese companies going overseas. And our sense is that the issues they are facing fundamentally are not different from the issues that US companies faced 20 years ago when they tried to enter China, or many of the sort of Japanese, whatever companies coming to Southeast Asia many years ago. So you have the product issues. I mean, whatever you have seen as being successful in China, does that apply to Southeast Asia? Does that apply to other markets? So a typical example is Ant Financial, Mayi. So many of their products prove to be too complicated for users in, say, Indonesia and the Philippines. But for them, this is natural in China. Even Wechat is too complicated for users outside China. So, but how do you localize? How do you uncover the real customer needs? It's not that easy. So then you have the issue of the people. So I'm not sure you guys noticed that Lazada replaced its CEO a few weeks ago. Yeah, and the previous CEO was a French guy who actually was part of the founding team on Lazada before it was acquired by Alibaba, and now it's been replaced by someone who's Alibaba veteran. The problem with people is that for big companies, when a person is not part of the establishment, it's not part of the sort of the core, it's very difficult for the person to get resources. But when you send someone who's very experienced from headquarters to a new market and who's very established, does the person have the drive and willingness to go to the ground, to go to the small shops in Indonesia, for example, in the countryside, to see what people are buying? I think they've gone past that age. So it's quite difficult to find the right people to drive the business outside China. And of course, you have the organizational problems, which are similar to people problems, and where you have a business unit in, say, Vietnam is not a good example, say Malaysia, whose business accounts for 0.02% of overall group business, and 98% of business is from China. And imagine who gets more power, who gets more sort of resources from the group. But fundamentally, all these issues boils down to leadership. That I think anyone in business school would know. As I mentioned, many of these companies are new. So when they get outside China, so they want to try different markets to see which one works. And the one which works would get more resources. The ones which don't work would not get any resources. And but the problem with that is that quite often you don't know why certain markets work, certain markets don't work. And as a result, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, by chance, this market turns out to be really good. You give more resources, And of course, they can perform even better because they have the money to do marketing, they have the money to hire more people. So that's one example of that is, I'm not sure if you know a short video app in China called Kuaishou. So they went outside China to try different markets. And initially it's like a very small investment to see that how's the performance, how's the user feedback, how's the user stickiness, and how easy to generate content. And Brazil and Turkey turned out to be good markets, and they got more resources and they become even better markets. But many places in Southeast Asia did not perform that well in the initial test. So they didn't get the resources and continued to not perform well until Kuaishou's competitor, which is TikTok, occupied these markets. So just give you a case study about this. Alibaba, it has multiple companies inside and outside China. So in Southeast Asia, you would have Ant Financial, which is running sort of digital wallets with joint venture partners across I think 6 or 7 Southeast Asian countries. And you would have Lazada, which they acquired from Rocket Internet in 2016. You had AliExpress, which is the overseas version of Taobao, if I can say that, which was active in Indonesia for a while, but because Lazada was acquired, so they took a step back. And you have Alibaba Cloud, which is competing against Amazon Web Services, Huawei Cloud, etc. And they're also investing in especially fintech companies like BluePay, Aku in Indonesia. BluePay is a company based in Thailand, but has a largely business in Indonesia as well. They're investing in companies like Tokopedia, Paytm, TrueMoney, and Gcash. So it seems to be a lot of activities going on, but is that really going on well? It remains to be tested. I think for Alibaba, the international efforts are still new. And especially now when executives can't really travel across different countries, I think lots of decisions are impacted. I mean, we're not on the ground. We have local executives on the ground. They tell you that, okay, what you do is wrong, or what your decision is wrong. Do you trust them? Do you not trust them? And it's difficult. Talk a little bit about the new normal. This is the company based in Singapore. I think it has recently become the most valuable company in Singapore, overtaking DBS. It's C Group. And it owns Garena, the gaming platform, on Shopee for e-commerce, as well as a new division called the C-Money. Across the world, the pandemic has caused people to shift from buying offline to buying online for e-commerce. I'm personally, I'm not really afraid of going out during the circuit breaker or whatever just to buy essentials. But as we have seen in the data, lots of people, I mean, people's risk tolerance level is different. I mean, lots of people do not want to go out at all because they're afraid of risk, and they choose to buy everything online. And that does something that that many of the e-commerce companies over the years didn't manage to do, which is massive transformation of retail from offline to online. So Shopee is doing a good job in Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia. And so in Latin America, you have a company called Mercado Libre, which is doing significantly well. And they just released their quarterly results last week. Every metric is 100%, more than 100% better than the previous year. So, and you even have companies like in Africa, which got lots of investor attention because they believe that e-commerce is changing everywhere. And even Amazon, such a big company, in the second quarter, the online sales grew 40%. Amazing, right? I mean, and our sense is that, I mean, like China, when people shift from offline to online, and this shift might be permanent. So if you say that, okay, total retail, I mean, e-commerce as part of total retail before COVID was maybe 3%, 4%. After e-commerce, after COVID, it might be more than 10%, and it might stay that way. So that will create lots of changes. I mean, in Singapore, I mean, if you know any of the retail owners, and many of them are going online because for the past few years, many resisted e-commerce because they said, okay, I'm operating in the mall. I have the people coming, and I'm making money. Why do I have to try something new? But now they're forced to do that because, I mean, for a few months, malls were closed. Even now, malls are open and the traffic is limited. So they're forced to do that. So this shift is permanent. And I think it would impact lots of other industries as well. I mean, e-commerce will create an ecosystem, payment, logistics, e-commerce service companies and brands, etc. Everybody's sort of roped into this ecosystem. There's another company called Shopify. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of. It's a Canadian company. And what they do, they help companies create e-commerce presence. They help companies sort of, I mean, you can use their tool to create like an e-commerce website. You can use their tool to create an app, and you can use their payment, etc., etc. And this is their share price performance year to date. As you can see, it also grew like multiple times. And because so many people are actually moving to, I mean, as I said, like so many retail owners and small businesses are moving on to e-commerce, and not everyone can benefit much from Shopee and Lazada. Many of them are saying, hey, I want my own website, but of course they're not going to hire someone to develop a dedicated website for them. So there's a tool and they'll just pay to use. And this company is benefiting tremendously from that. I mean, other companies like, even if you're familiar with the US, companies like FedEx and UPS are having their share prices like doubled during the last year or so. This company, this is also another article from our blog. So it's a company called iFlix, who's created out of Malaysia. It does streaming. So basically, initially they wanted to create Netflix for Southeast Asia and beyond. They went to the Middle East as well. They hired lots of expensive people from Hollywood. They created local content. They licensed lots of expensive Western content. And as a result, it just couldn't sustain itself. I think it raised like $300 million, more than $300 million of venture capital, but it struggled in the past to make money. Because I mean, if you go to places like Indonesia, people are not willing to pay. And even if they are willing to pay, they don't have the payment methods for you to easily like receive the money. I mean, not like Singapore, everyone would have a bank card or even credit card. I mean, Indonesia credit card penetration is 3%. And also the advertising is not there yet. The market is very relatively small. So what happened a few months ago, Tencent acquired the company's assets. Its people, its content inventory, its operations, its customers. And Tencent is going big into content in Southeast Asia because it's almost no brainer, right? I mean, when people are stuck at home, they consume more content, more long form content. So Tencent acquired iFlix, and they also launched their own services in Thailand and in Vietnam. Another Chinese company called iQIYI, they made some high profile hires in Singapore earlier this year, and they are also in many regional markets. And Disney is coming as well. So they're launching in September in Indonesia. So all this new business, and of course we have Netflix here. So that creates different opportunities for content, and people believe that over the past years, this company have educated market, and you might be able to reap the benefits that these companies have sort of paved the way for you to enter. Oh, we did a report about used cars. This is the industry, but maybe many of them as students are not familiar with. So cars, there are lots of cars in the society, and people sell their old cars. People buy secondhand hard cars. There's this company called Carvana in the US, which sources cars and sells cars, and it has been doing very well, and especially during the pandemic, because some people's purchasing power is affected. Instead of buying new cars, they buy secondhand cars. And many people would want more liquidity, more cash. They sell their cars, so that creates lots of transactions. And these companies, as a result, while the car manufacturers are suffering, and they benefit from that, they create lots of transactions. So on our blog, beginning of every year, we sort of make predictions about tech in particular continents. and quite often it turned out to be pretty accurate. So this is the predictions that we did for 2020. Last week, we did actually a review of these predictions. We said, okay, COVID happened, lots of things changed. Maybe we should shift our predictions, and maybe some of the things are not applicable anymore. But we went through this draft that we wrote in December last year, and many of them are actually still quite relevant. So last 3 to 4 years, lots of tech companies and lots of investment, lots of venture capital created lots of, I would say, bubble or whatever. So, but many companies are not solid. And if the conditions are good, they can continue to run till the moment that they go for IPO and stuff. But conditions are not good now. So whichever company is solid, whichever company is not solid, and you can see immediately, and not solid companies would need to cut people, and we need to sort of recruit very quickly, but many of them are not even able to sustain themselves. So we already see like a few companies collapse, and I think we'll see more towards this last quarter of the year. So we expected e-commerce and payment companies to consolidate. So over the last year, I think Shopee has made significant progress in Indonesia, and that creates pressure for some of their competitors. We would imagine that so people have reached a stage that they are not really able to, I mean, some of them are not really able to or comfortable to burn money anymore. So that might cause some consolidation. But of course, I mean, the challenge is that people can't negotiate nowadays because they can't meet each other. So for large deals to take place, it's more difficult. Grab Financial becomes bigger than Grab ride hailing, and this is no brainer, right? I mean, when people don't travel as much, people don't use sort of private cars that much, but the financial services are still there, and the company is putting more emphasis on that. Social e-commerce continues to grow, and for those of you who are using WeChat in Singapore, you will realize that lots of WeChat-based commerce that's going on in Singapore. Philippines finally takes off. This, I don't think it's going to happen this year because along with Indonesia is the worst hit in Southeast Asia, and many of the businesses will not be able to recover that quickly. So Korean investors put lots of emphasis in Vietnamese startups. We still continue to see that. Even now we see a Korean food delivery company putting like hundreds of millions of dollars in Vietnam market. Growth ones becomes more available. Yes, but the challenge is that again, people can't travel. So for startups, for tech companies to get invested, and especially later stage, people need to meet face to face. People need to do due diligence. People need to go to your company to check. So that becomes problematic. So more countries start digital banking licenses. I think Singapore is going to announce its digital banks, the first batch, I think in September. So people are putting high emphasis or high hopes on Grab's Intel, as well as Shopee's parent company, C Group. Let's see how it goes. Mobility companies and also more Indian companies expand to Southeast Asia. That has been happening as well. So in terms of technology, so I think I have like two more slides. So this is NASDAQ, and I took this screenshot I think 2 days ago. No, a few days ago, sorry. And you will see that overall the technology trend is growing, but along the way you have bumps. You have, I think 2020 there's a dot-com bubble and things went down, but after a few years it's going up again. In 2018 you will see that because of the financial crisis it went down, but the long-term trend of shift into technology, I think that's going, even with lots of bumps on the road. So I think somebody's asking a question about how people can be sort of future-proof. I would say that I mean just look at long-term trend and with the right timing. So so one of our investors is from Alibaba, one of the co-founders. I think quite often sort of people who do the right things at the right time, they can ride the wave. And people who sort of work very hard, but in an industry that's not growing, in a sector, in a company that's not growing, then no matter how hard you work, you will not go that far. And so this is a blog that we wrote actually 2 years ago. We just feel that first, you need to put yourself always in a growth environment, and second, I think as if you are still students, if you are graduating, or if you are just 1 or 2 years into your career, look at what can be the long-term trends. Keep your eyes open, because I mean, it's been 7 years since I graduated from my MBA. I look at my classmates. Many of them are in very different places. Some of them have grown a lot. Some of them stayed the same. Quite often, it's not because of their sort of personal capabilities, but it is because where they are and what kind of timing that they fit themselves into. So that's something that it's probably worth spend some time to constantly think about and to constantly expose yourself to different things. That's the end of what I have to say. So we have a blog, tod.momentum.asia, and we also have a WeChat account, which I believe the QR code is for that account. So I have a few questions. So I think the moderators, should I answer the questions now, or we can do it later?
We can do it later, yeah, okay, in the panel discussion session. Yeah.
That's all from me.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Jianggan, for the insightful speech. And we have seen also quite a few interesting questions posted in the Q&A tab, which we will discuss later. And to the audience, don't hesitate to voice out your questions if you haven't done so. It would be, a great opportunity to have our experienced speakers help clarify your doubts and fulfill your curiosity. So last but not least, let us welcome the last speaker for this session, Prof. Wong, professor at NUS Business School and also School of Public Policy and NUS Engineering faculty. So Prof. Wong, please.
Oh, sorry. Wait, let me try again. Okay, can you see my slide?
Sorry, we couldn't see your slides. It seemed that you have not.
Yeah. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, first of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I've been asked to talk about what does the new normal implies in terms of challenges and opportunities to the audience, especially many of you who are still students or are young working professional, and some of you may be entrepreneurs or professionals and in the industry that may be affected. Yeah. Of course, there are many things that I want to talk about, but I like to only focus on a small number of things that may be relevant to you. But let me first start by highlighting that the global driver for the new normal is more than just the COVID-19 pandemic, although that certainly had the biggest impact. As you have heard from Professor Swee, the COVID-19 is here to stay. The leading epidemiologists in the world have all agreed that whatever scientific breakthrough in vaccines or whatever, we're going to have to live with COVID for a while. And McKinsey, the leading consulting company in the world, has predicted that the hardest hit sectors like tourism and so on will take probably more than 5 years to recover, if at all. Yeah. But I want to go beyond the COVID-19 because, as we all are aware, there are two other major developments that are helping to shape this new normal. The first, which has been alluded to by Jianggan, of course, is that the new Cold War launched by the US against China. This, of course, has started before the COVID-19, but it will be sort of increasing, and whatever is your prediction about the US coming election in November, whether Trump, the Republican or the Democratic wins, the general consensus is that the US will continue this Cold War with China because at heart it is about the US unwillingness to give up its global hegemony, and they see China's threat in terms of technological capabilities that will make it impossible for US to remain the global hegemony, right? Now, the other third factor, which again had been going on for some time, but is being accelerated both by the pandemic and also by, to some extent, the last few years of Trump's Make America Great policies, is the fact that the reality is that the US dominance in the global economy have been on the decline, but this is being accelerated. And this also carries some interesting implications that I would like to highlight. So I'd like to focus on three trend that I think may be of particular interest to the audience here. The first is, of course, about the acceleration of digital transformation of knowledge work. Of course, digital technology is transforming all spheres of life, but I want to focus in particular on their effect on knowledge work, which perhaps is something that are closest to all of us. Yeah. Second, I want to highlight that markets and work opportunities in this coming decade will become increasingly multicultural for those of us who are in Asia, and in particular in Singapore and China. And I'll explain a bit more what that means. Yeah. And third is that innovation will become the primary driver for economic growth. And that's something that all of us, whether you are in the startup or existing business or even big corporation, you have to deal with the fact that innovation will be the key focus of what you do going forward. Let me start by talking about digital transformation of knowledge work. Now, of course, all of us have experienced this big disruption to our daily life in the form of the shift from work from home to many of us, right? In the few months ago, we all work in offices, and now we work from home. And for those of you who are still students, you sort of learn from home, yeah? Now, I show you this brief picture to highlight the implications this shift means, right? This shows that in China, over a period of 3 months, the equivalent of almost the entire population of the US moved from working in office to working at home online. Over 300 million new users on essentially work at home technology, either through Ping Talk, Wechat Work, or Tencent Meeting. And of course, the impact has extended to many other economic spheres. Those of you who are still studying, many of you have been put on online learning. Many hospitals in China have moved to online patient consulting, much more so than Singapore, as Professor Xu has highlighted. And also many companies are shifting to, for example, video interviewing and recruitment. Now, we all know that these digital technologies have been in existence for quite a while. So the reason why they had not been as widely adopted in the past was because of various resistance and organizational inertia. But COVID-19 has kind of made a permanent change in this to make people realize that actually you can be productive working from home, well, in many cases, yeah? And in a sense, what is happening is not that we are seeing a lot of brand new technology, but that many existing digital technologies are being accelerated in their adoption and diffusion, right? For example, you all know that in order to work from home, you got to have apps and data sharing on the cloud. But that technology had already been around for a while, yeah? We all now buy groceries, have food delivery to our home. but that online supply-demand matching platforms had already been there for a while. So the point is that what we will be seeing is that it's a great accelerations of the adoption of these technologies. Now, from a theoretical standpoint, you can see that what digital technology does is that it unbundles many traditional jobs into their constituent tasks, and then it eliminates some of them, and then rebundle the rest into new job configurations. In the process, new human tasks will also emerge. So, for example, this GCC, as I understand in the past, was a face-to-face conference. But of course, one of the main tasks when you're organizing a conference face-to-face is, of course, you got to book hotel and arrange catering. That is eliminated. That task is eliminated because now, right, you don't have face-to-face meeting. I believe, however, that this shift to online webinar meeting and so on will also create new tasks. So, for example, my prediction is that in the future, a webinar conference like this will not be just one big webinar like what we are doing now, but it will have many pre and post webinar conference of small meetings. Because if you think about it, part of the value add of a conference, face-to-face conference like GCC in the past is that it provides social networking for people to meet with others who may have potential interests that fit their client needs and a whole set of other sort of factors. So as we move towards online a conference meeting, what you'll be seeing then is that we will create the equivalent sort of opportunity for one-to-one or a small group kind of social networking. And that will be enabled also because of the technology such that you could, for example, use AI to figure out who may have a close interest to talk to who. And by looking at the subsequent response to how these meetings are being done, what happened to it, the AI will further improve. So that's an example of new human tasks, new tasks that will be created because we are digitizing the work. Now, another major consequences I'd like to highlight is that this digital transformation of knowledge work is enabling a completely new geographical redistribution of work. So I will give an example that is probably very familiar to all those of you who are from China. The case of VIP Kit, right? VIP Kit actually started before COVID-19. It just provides an internet platform that match English teachers who live at home in North America to provide one-on-one tutoring to Chinese students who live at home in China. Now, what this means is that the teacher or the teaching task could now be distributed to anywhere in the world. And indeed, as a result of COVID-19, VIP Kit has now expanded their footprint to have their services being offered to many students in different parts of the world and to have teachers located in different parts of the world. So therefore, this geographical redistribution will have significant impact on the job market as well. So essentially, right, for those of you who are coming out to the job market and looking for work, the issue you need to ask yourself will be, you will have increased competition, because if the knowledge work can be done anywhere in the world, including locations that labor costs are much cheaper, you are getting more competitions. Essentially, work at home, it doesn't matter you work at home in the same city or you work at home 10,000 miles away. Yeah? On the other hand, you could say that it also creates opportunity for those of you, if you have skills and knowledge that are in demand, that you can now work globally while working at home without having to relocate or do too much travel. You probably still have to do some. So this gives you more options. At the same time, you can also think about choosing to live in a lower cost location than where you are now. After all, Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai are not the cheapest place in the world to live. Yeah. And I guess for firms and entrepreneurs, the interesting thing would be that you have, because of COVID-19, suddenly you have this new normal that it's okay to work at home. It's okay for many things to be done, not face-to-face, that you have tremendous new opportunities to innovate. And this is where the entrepreneurial opportunity will come from. I think Jianggan had mentioned a couple of the startups that are helping in this. So there is a lot more that can be done now with digital technology to raise productivity and to reduce cost. Of course, you have an emerging challenge, which is that how do you build teamwork, trust, and social cohesion when your workforce is no longer centrally located in one place, and you need to reach out to them in very different circumstances. I want to add, however, that there's also great opportunity now to use digital technology to really, for those of you who are interested in social entrepreneurship, to do good by enabling inclusive employment. I want to give you an example of how this has been done. Yeah? This is the case of a company called Genestim. It is a company that provides corporate online e-learning services that was founded in 2004 by a Malaysian who lives in Melbourne, Australia, although their customers are global, mostly in Southeast Asia. The interesting thing is that its workforce of about 100 are dispersed in 10 countries, most work at home, and more importantly, almost all are persons with disabilities. So by using essentially the digitized work, he is able to actually enable all this person with disabilities to be able to work from home and so on. And all this have happened before COVID-19. Let me see if I can show you a video of the example. Oh, sorry. This lady is called Safida Nadia. She's the personal assistant to the CEO. The CEO is living in Melbourne. She is living in a small rural village in Malaysia. What is more important is that you don't really need to hear the sound, and you can just see. I'll just play a short clip. Okay, so here you have a person who has a cerebral palsy that immobilized her entire body. The only thing that she can move is one finger on one hand and her head. However, with the intelligent adaptive use of technology, she is able to perform the equivalent work of a personal assistant. She arranges travel for the CEO. She takes minutes of meetings. She is a go-between between the CEO and the key managers, relaying instructions. With that one single finger and a simple adaptation, she can also work your smartphone, so she can make calls and do everything that a normal body person can do. I hope this example kind of illustrates that with this digitized work environment, you are leveraging on the intelligence and you're to enable many people who otherwise were excluded in the global economies. People who live in rural, remote part of the world, people with various kind of handicaps, they can now be brought into the global workforce. Yeah. Okay. The next thing I want to highlight is the thing about the other second major mega trend I want to highlight is that markets and work opportunities are becoming increasingly multicultural. There are several factors that drive this, as I indicated here, but let me sort of run through some of those factors. Now, sometimes perception lags behind reality to many of us may think that the US is by far the largest economy in the world still. After all, it has been that for many years. And as this slide shows, if you measure the size of the world economy in terms of GDP, yes, US is the largest economy. But in fact, if you do what is the more correct way, that you look at the purchasing price parity adjusted size of the economy, China is already the largest economy in the world today. And in fact, 5 of the 10 largest economies in the world today are no longer the advanced economy, that they are from the emerging markets. And the prediction is that in 10 years' time, India will overtake China in terms of GDP, PPP adjusted, and ASEAN as a group will be the 4th largest economy in the world. And 7 of these largest economies will be emerging markets. In fact, the prediction, if you go all the way to 2050 by another consulting company, suggests that the 7 emerging, largest emerging market will be double the size of G7, and the share of the United States and the European Union combined will be only 1/5 of the world. Not just 1/5 of population, but 1/5 in GDP, purchasing power. You can also see that where the most vibrant opportunities in terms of big cities are in the next 15 years. 52 of the world's largest cities in terms of GDP will be in Asia, with China alone accounting for 34. And the other thing you want to look at is the purchasing power of the middle class, because it is the middle class that actually drive major innovations and major new product and service market growth, because they got the mass and scale. Now, by most analysis, close to 9 out of 10 new middle class population over the next 10 years will be created in Asia. And by 2030, the middle class in ASEAN will be bigger than that of the United States. Today, for example, China's share of the global consumption has become much bigger than what most people realize. Yeah? China is accounting for more than 40% of the world's demand for mobile phone, for electric vehicle, for fish, and for, well, alcohol. Yeah. So what we are seeing is a hastening of this new multicultural normal in Asia. These economic links in Asia are becoming more diverse. There's a declined share of Western economic dominance, and there's growing intra-Asia economic links. Of course, this is helped by the fact that it's going to be helped by the fact that China, because of the Cold War, is going to heighten its strategic pivot to emerging markets through the One Belt, One Road, and in particular to ASEAN, something that Jianggan has also mentioned. Yeah? And equally importantly, you're going to see growing intra-Asia, including intra-ASEAN interactions. More people will be moving from Korea, from from India to ASEAN. More Chinese companies coming to ASEAN, and within ASEAN, more flow of people and more flow of trade, investment, and so on. Right. So what this means is that you are going to have also a decline, while the economic importance of the region, which are very diverse in terms of culture, are growing in importance. You also have the decline of Western cultural dominance, right? In the past, most of the global brands are all Western, the medias are all Western, but going forward, and as we have really seen happening over the last 5-10 years, you have a growing middle class and educated elites in these emerging markets with greater self-confidence, nationalist pride, and cultural renaissance. We see that happening in China. You no longer just think of Western brand. Now you are seeing, indigenous brand. And so the rapid rise of indigenous and pan-Asian firms with products, brands, and cultural icons that speak better to the cultural identity of the region than Western firms. So that means that there will be a lot more Korean, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, maybe Malaysian, Singaporean brand growing in importance within the region. And of course, along with this rise of the region, you have a growing importance of the Asian languages. Chinese language, for example, is going to be much more important going forward. Now, this chart shows you that the total number of speakers of the various language, Mandarin Chinese is already close to matching that of English. Although, of course, if you think about native speaker, there are a lot more native speaker of Chinese than English. But going forward, you will see the number of people who can speak Chinese will exceed that of English. And those who can speak Hindi will also significantly increase, similarly for other regional languages. Now, I want to emphasize that this increasingly multicultural markets and workforce is required us to think about the need to understand another culture. And I want to point out that it is more than just understanding another language. So bilingualism is not just, I can speak another language, but the key is really understanding another culture. I think for many of us in Singapore, the young generation, you be able to read and write and speak in Chinese, but the level of understanding we have of Chinese culture is still very shallow. So I think this is the point that I'm trying to drive at, is that you really need to have a deep understanding of the culture of the region. And another important thing to think about is that this mindset of multiculturalism is more than just that about dealing with different cultures itself, but really it's about embracing diversity. In other words, going forward, an important skill, and I want to address a question that was raised by somebody in the chat. Important skills in this new normal is your ability to have the empathy, to understand, respect, and relate harmoniously to people who are different from you. It could be culture, but it also could be race, it could be religion, it could be gender, it could be age. And this ability to work across diversity is going to be important, because in the region going forward, in the new normal, it's going to be a much more diverse market, much more diverse cultural environments. Now, the third thing I want to highlight is that Asia is moving increasingly towards innovation. Now, of course, this is driven very much by the Cold War. I mean, China had been steadily, increasing its investment in technology, and so has Korea, so has other Asian economy. But of course, the Cold War has catapulted the whole sort of technology race to a next level. As you can see, China now has no choice but to double down on further relying on self-development so that its technological capability is not controlled by the Americans. And in this process, as you can see, China will want to ensure that it has self-reliance. Now, as you can see, over the years, China has started to expand its investment in research and development. It had probably overtaken the United States in terms of the amount spent on R&D. It has published more scientific paper than the US. In last year, it had filed more patents than the United States. Now, granted that many of the patents from China are still not as a high quality as though coming from other advanced economy, but it's changing rapidly. Yeah, China is catching up rapidly in terms of internet market technology. It is now, of course, right, we all know one of the key sort of tension is over the US unwillingness to sort of let Huawei and China to take the lead in the 5G, right? China has also advanced rapidly in a range of advanced technology. I show here, for example, in the area of AI and man-human interface technology, the rate of patenting in China has far exceeded that of other countries. And in an advanced field like quantum computing, China is now filing a lot more patents, and by several expert accounts, China is actually had an edge over the US. And of course, China has developed its own venture capital industry, and today China has more AI firms that are being funded and than the rest of the world. China is moving steadily to generate economic value, not through in the past as a low-cost manufacturing hub of the world, but more through technology-based industries. The export will become increasingly more technology-based. And of course, some of you may have heard of the strategy by China to develop a leading global innovation hub in the Greater Bay area in southern China to rival that of San Francisco Bay Area, which includes the Silicon Valley and Tokyo Bay. Yeah? Now, of course, as China is doing this, the rest of Asia has no choice but to also start to invest heavily in innovations. So unlike 20 years ago when most of Asia rely on innovation that came out of the US, and we try to copy and adapt it into Asia. Today, you see a lot more first in the world innovation coming not from the US or Europe, it's going to come from within the region. So the new normal then, if I may re-summarize, is that you have to cope with a digitalized work environment. You have to deal with a multicultural markets and work environment, and you need to live with innovation and the uncertainty they go with it. Because unlike a normal operational job, any work related to innovation carry risk. Innovation may fail, funding may not work through, there may be some other political factor that prevent market growth and so on. So, but essentially, where the key area that you probably need to deal with is these three. Yeah. So, if I may just end by just highlighting, okay, to our Singaporean firms and entrepreneurs, what is your China strategy? Of course, China is a huge market. The only way that a Singaporean entrepreneur firm can succeed there, of course, increasingly, it has to be your innovation capability. That's your only source of competitive advantage now. And your key challenge now, of course, is to find the right opportunity gap in China. In other words, to have certain technology that China doesn't have now, or to identify a market opportunity gap that is not as big yet in China, and for you to exploit it first. Of course, the key challenge is to find the right local partner in China to help you do that. Increasingly, we will move from copy from US to copy from China to ASEAN. So some of you may want to think about, okay, what are the latest interesting innovation coming out of China? Can we quickly adapt it to the Asian market because we have more superior knowledge of the local market? And so some of you may want to think about a copy to ASEAN strategy. Yeah, some of you may be in the business of saying, okay, we have superior local market knowledge, we got the regional connection and network. We can be a good partner to Chinese companies who want to get out. You have just heard Jianggan mentioned just now that one of the challenges that Chinese companies trying to get out of China is that they have no experience in dealing with foreign market, and in particular dealing with multicultural environment. And so if you have that multicultural knowledge, you could be their good partners. And lastly, of course, if you really want to see yourself as competing with Chinese company who's coming out and providing product and services that are similar to yours, you need to combine both your innovation capability as well as your regional connection or your multicultural skills. And if you are one of the PMDT or you're a student looking for asking the question about, going into the job market, it would seem to me that being proficient in English and Chinese are really important. But I would even argue that you should get yourself be proficient in a third language, because most of these growth market, whether it's Vietnam, Thailand, India, you will have an advantage if you are able to command the language. I want to emphasize that not just the language, but the language as a window to their culture. Yeah. So my advice would be that if you are a Singaporean student, where possible, get first-hand exposure to the Chinese market and culture, live and study or work in China for a period, and be familiar with the cutting-edge technology that are being introduced in China, and develop social capital in China. Well, even in Singapore, if you have many Chinese classmates, make good friends with them, yeah, so that they can be on your connection to insider knowledge and so on. And of course, I will encourage you to get first-hand exposure to other emerging markets and culture. Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, India. So I guess for a Singaporean student or a PMET, one of the things I feel you might be able to still have an edge would be to have your multicultural interpersonal skills and management capability. The advantage of Singapore is that we are already a fairly multicultural economy. And so learning and being good at doing this may be an edge that you have compared to a Chinese executives. As Jianggan had mentioned, many Chinese companies have difficulty internationalizing outside because they face the same challenge that Japanese company have, which is that it's too top down, and they don't have the local understanding, and they cannot be as responsive and fast moving. So if you command the language, you understand the culture, you have the social capital connection, at the same time, you also understand the local culture, you will have an advantage. Lastly, I just want to end by talking about if you are an entrepreneur firm in China, I think the growth opportunity in the new normal will be outside China, and in particular to the emerging market outside China, no longer the advanced Western market. Now, clearly, for many of you, leveraging the technological innovation that you have already developed in China will be an important factor. But clearly, in this multicultural world, very often a pure export or standardized technology will not do. You probably need to take what we in international business call multi-domestic strategy. That you need to take your core technology, core innovation, and figure out how to adapt it and localize it to the local region. Yeah. Many of you may also find that China is becoming no longer cheap, and so you probably be going out to the emerging market to look for lower cost labor and so on. But again, here multicultural management capability will be critical. Well, I guess my one advertisement here, to the Chinese entrepreneur would be that you can consider using Singapore as a regional multicultural hub for you to go to the rest of Asia, Southeast Asia, depending on what kind of business you are in. Last but not least, to the Chinese student and PMDT, I would encourage you to also think about developing a multicultural mindset. I think for many people, young people in China, you have grown up in a fairly monocultural environment. So you have not sort of availed yourself to this much bigger multicultural market opportunity outside. So while learning English will continue to be important, I would encourage you to also to learn a third language and suddenly get first-hand exposure to another emerging culture, whether it's in ASEAN or in one of the BRI, Belt Road Initiative country. And again, as a marketing spiel, I would then say that you may want to consider tapping Singapore as your multicultural hub to acquire multicultural network contact management experience and skill. So in a way, by studying in NUS For example, you should avail yourself to this opportunity to develop your multicultural network context. So apology for that advertisement, and I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Wong, for the insightful speech. And for the next 20 minutes, we will be moving on to the panel discussion session. So I would like to invite Dr. Li Yang and Jianggan back into the panel. And our moderator for this session will be Jia and myself. So let's dive right into answer the audience questions. And I think for both, I see a common pattern between both questions talking about, the recent action of US and Indian government's ban of Chinese apps. And people are a little bit concerned about such changes with what kind of impact will it make on the future internet industry? And maybe some of you could take that question.
Jianggan, you want to go first since you are the industry expert, yeah?
Well, I actually, I think what I didn't tell people just now in my speech is that I came to Singapore 20 years ago, but over the course of the last 20 years, I moved away from Singapore 4 times,
right,
and moved back. And one of the experiences was in India. That was back in 2011 in my first job, and I was largely dealing with the public sector in India. I think over the last few years, there was always a debate amongst the Chinese companies and investors that what they should really do with the Indian market, because it's huge. I mean, its population is probably overtaking China, if the statistics are accurate. But the spending power has been low, and even we have done lots of studies about the demographics and the sort of the policies, the ecosystem, etc. So I think people are conflicted, but for companies like ByteDance, in terms of content, in terms of users, in terms of advertising value to the users, I mean, India has been a good market, especially last few years. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, the richest man in India, Mukesh Ambani, he's the guy who has this huge house in Mumbai, and he has built a telco called Jio, which gave almost I can't remember numbers, but it sort of made the coverage, 4G coverage to the entire India, and that creates opportunities for many companies, for Facebook, for of course WhatsApp. I mean, India's WhatsApp's biggest market, and TikTok. I mean, if you don't factor in Douyin, TikTok is India's TikTok's biggest market. But can companies monetize from that? I mean, that's something that people have not been sure about. I think many have the belief that the market will grow, and over the next few years they will be able to monetize, and people will start. And the sort of turning point that brands would be willing to advertise online instead of now. I mean, they use TV, radio, and sort of offline channels, banners. But coming back to the question of this ban. Actually, I think many companies did not know that going out of China, you have to deal with a different set of interest groups, different set of political landscape. India is complex because it's democracy, so that means that they have multiple interest groups that are fighting for I mean, sometimes fighting against each other, sometimes fighting for people's attention, etc., etc. So it's quite difficult to navigate through. I think now the companies from China are realizing that it's more complicated than they thought before. Initially, they just said, okay, you have so many users and we have advanced technology, and even the phones are manufactured in China, so we know how to deal with it. But now I think that they realize they have to engage with the public sector, and they have to lobby the public, and in a very sophisticated way. As the openness of internet, that's a very tough question to answer, to be honest. I mean, we are living in a world, especially this year, lots of populist policies in different countries, and I mean, there's competing priorities, etc., etc. So overall, I honestly, I don't like how things are going, but but I guess we have to deal with whatever that's happening. And under COVID, you sort of feel that it becomes more important what kind of messages that companies, governments, and people are sending out to the public. I do think that that many Chinese companies are, not that particularly good at engaging with the different facets of the society, so that they can actually survive or stay in a new market for the long term. I think it's a learning process. It will take years, and you will face challenges. But overall, I think the trend is continuing. I mean, if you look at Facebook a few years ago, 2 years ago, you remember there's one point that Mark Zuckerberg had to go to the Congress to testify. That was a major sort of point in Facebook history that people believe that a company might be broken up, but it hasn't happened. We went through the challenge. I think people running companies, they're entrepreneurs, so they know that it's challenging. They have to deal with it, and the world is not as simple as black and white. So have to deal with it.
Yeah, if I may add to Jianggan's point, is that this is the reality of a multicultural world in which we're going through a phase in which the US is still trying to maintain its dominance, while in reality it is losing it. And so we will have a period in which geopolitical considerations of the Cold War will dictate, for example, a market like India, where India is geopolitically aligned with the United States. And so if I'm an entrepreneur, I'll be also looking at other emerging markets. For example, you all know under the One Belt, One Road policies that China is building stronger link with Pakistan, with Iran. And these are sizable markets themselves as well. And so I think a lot of people see certain markets because of familiarity through the Western media and so on. But there is a fairly large emerging markets out there which are sizable. So while I also, like Jianggan, do not like this development trend, in other words, the internet world will be bifurcated into two parts. I don't think the United States, even if the Democratic Party were to come to power, is likely to give up the attempt to try to dominate. So we will have to live with a period in which there will be some bifurcation. And therefore, you need to see how you could tap on this bifurcated market. And that's why it is important for Chinese companies to accelerate their move towards other emerging markets that have not fully fallen under the US hegemonic sort of control yet. And there are a sizable number of these. Russia is an example, Iran, and increasingly many developing world are actually getting disenchanted with the US political and market dominance. So I think they will start to shift their stand a little bit to try to, live with both. In a way, ASEAN is in this delicate situation as well, right? That we know that US is still important, but China is growing important. And so we cannot be entirely with one side, yeah? And so many of the emerging markets in the world will be in this middle range. And so it's up to you to really understand this multicultural landscape and find the right way to navigate them.
Sure. Thank you for all the answers. And maybe let me further that question and shift the focus maybe from the crisis to more of the opportunities presented by, COVID-19, the new normal. And also, because I think Dr. Li Yang just now mentioned about, telehealth. And I wonder if there are any opportunities and that presented specifically to Southeast Asia and Singapore that we remain competitive in such a challenging landscape. Maybe you could take that question first, Dr. Li Yang.
Thank you. That's a challenging question. I mean, the prospects of telehealth is great. And similarly, AI in healthcare is a huge market. China has led the way here, but others like Google Health and even Apple are attempting to close this gap. The issue that many countries face is one of data privacy. Very few countries, including Singapore, if we think about it, would like the health data to be shipped up to cloud servers and companies that's outside of Singapore's jurisdiction. But that is the strategy of big companies like Google when it comes to developing AI apps. So I think we're in a bit of a bind if you just focus on Singapore alone, because to be able to match what is being developed in China and US seems a very high bar. But how do we then use the AI and those apps they've developed in the local context? That may be something that Professor Wong might be able to comment on far more than myself. But where I'm concerned, I think these are certainly big areas of developments, and that is where healthcare is going in the future, with or without COVID, but accelerated by COVID. Over.
Well, if I may comment from my perspective as an educator in the education industry, I see that the opportunity for growth is in education. You know, with the ongoing Cold War and the mishandling of the pandemic in the United States, the number, and as well as a number of other Anglo-American countries like Australia, the number of Asian talented students go to America, go to Australia to study, will be reduced. And they will be looking for opportunity within Asia itself. Last year, for example, I was in Beijing. I visited Tsinghua. I go regularly. I learned that, for example, that was before COVID. Tsinghua already admit more than 10% of their undergraduate from overseas. In fact, I understand it's higher than even NUS. And interestingly, for example, the second largest of foreign students in Tsinghua is from Malaysia. And in Malaysia, in the past, the top students come to Singapore, come to NUS. But now, because of the growing importance of China, and these students who graduated from Chinese independent schools in Malaysia, they can now get into Tsinghua without even taking the language Gaokao. And 95% of them get scholarship from Tsinghua with no bond. So it's an example to show that China is beginning to tap on talent from the region. And increasingly, good Asian students will say, you know, why go to the United States where we have to face this possible, you know, racist, you know, backlash and all that. You should go to Tsinghua. And likewise, top students from China say, hey, maybe they should come to NUS, you know. So I think that this part of the intra-Asian integration will be a good story for us to sort of to latch on. It's a growth opportunity.
Any thoughts on that, Jianggan?
Oh, I bought some shares of Teladoc, and I'm quite bullish about the company. So you can find out about the information here. It's a US company.
Sure. Maybe for the next, because I noticed, Jianggan, you were about to, you know, ask some questions to the speakers or for the discussion. Do you still have them now, or?
For me?
Yeah. So just now you were asking, you know, questions.
I think you're on mute. Andrea, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so I said just now you were like having questions you want to discuss with the speakers, right? Do you still have them now, or we can proceed with the questions from the audience?
I think can proceed. I think audience will take a priority.
Okay, sure. So from my side, we have collected many interesting questions from our audience before this summit. Here comes the first question. What is the biggest challenge for Singapore and Singapore firms to remain competitive in this post-pandemic world? Yeah, who wish to take this question first? maybe Prof. Wong.
Well, as I mentioned, we need to invest more in innovation. And innovation in those sectors where we have already a certain degree of excellence. As Professor Xu has mentioned, Singapore does have a very sort of high quality healthcare system. We have a healthcare technology, but it's not just technology, but the whole business, the whole operational processes, quality assurance, and so on. So I think that we should try to find areas where we have such global excellence, invest more in further technological innovation to strengthen them, and then we can then therefore use that as a basis to either export, go to the regional market, or we become a partner to other larger Asian countries who want to use our technology and help us grow. If you take telehealth, which Professor Stu had mentioned, for example, healthcare, unfortunately, is an example where really multi-domestic strategy is really important, because it's not about just technology, but the whole regulations and about payment ecosystem. Who actually pay for the healthcare, right? Is it the insurance company? Is it the, whatever? All these are very highly specific to the individual countries. And so if you just have the technology, you can't take it and bring it to another country. This is where you really need to build this local partnership and alliance, so that you can see how this is best adapted to the regulatory environment. And I will also say the other factor is of the infrastructure readiness. So for example, some of the technology coming out of China cannot work in certain markets because the infrastructure is just not there. And so you will need to sort of identify which is the best fit in terms of where your technological or your innovation sort of advantages. But I have no doubt that unless we invest more in innovations and further achieve our excellence in certain key sectors, very hard for us to compete globally or regionally. We do have some sectors like shipping, maritime services, may still be an area where we are good, and maybe finance and so on. So pick areas where we already have some excellence, and then use innovation to further build on it.
Maybe just a few quick points from me. I think during COVID, the office building I'm in hired an uncle as a security guard to take temperatures for everyone and stuff. And I think after the circuit breaker was lifted, I was actually going back to the office, but not many people were going back to the office. So for 2 days, there was only me and the uncle in the whole building. So I had lunch with him for both days. So he was a professional. He worked in semiconductor as an engineer, so senior engineer for almost 25 years. And then the company decided to shut their factory in Singapore and move to Suzhou. And he was retrenched. And afterwards, he couldn't find any job. And it's been tough. And he told me that he was like shifting between security guard and a taxi driver. I mean, for highly qualified and professional. And when I was talking to him about semiconductor back in, because when I was going to, I graduated from NTU. So when I was there's lots of excitement about semiconductor, about Micron and all these companies and AMD, etc. So when I was talking to him about that, he was very excited. He was telling me about old history and stuff. But when I talk about the present, he was quite sad. And I think one thing I sort of realized, as I grew older and older, is that the government here is actually very forward-looking. So lots of these sectors that they've been planning for the future, and sort of planning talent, etc., etc., have been planned like a few years ahead. And of course, you can't make all the predictions right. Sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you predict that trend would happen. You prepare the workforce for that. The trend didn't happen. It's usual. But just as I mentioned, lots of people are forced to go to e-commerce now, and many of them had the opportunity to go to the to actually start omni-channel, start e-commerce before COVID hit. And but I think many business owners who were comfortable making a profit, and they didn't see the need to do so. But I think that should apply to not only Singapore, so to any business owner, to any individual, to any government, that even if you're in a very, very comfortable time, you should always think about, I mean, this might not last forever. Always have the sense of things might change, and if things change, I mean, do I remain competitive? And we work with some large, and sometimes we actually handle some consulting projects for some large organizations to make their workforce sort of future-proof. Sometimes it's quite difficult to convince people when they are in a comfortable situation. They don't see what might be coming, and even if things are coming, and they choose to be ignorant. So I do believe that I mean, even for us hiring people, etc., Singapore still has lots of advantage over regional countries. We have large operations in Indonesia, but having like qualified, competent, English-speaking professionals, I mean, Singapore still holds advantage, but this advantage might not last. And I said I was in Jakarta 33 times last year, and this year I've been in Singapore for almost the whole year. I actually miss Jakarta because people there are optimistic. People there have the sense that the future is going to be good, and that they work hard towards that. This is something that I saw in Shenzhen when I was working in Hong Kong about 8-9 years ago. So I think Prof once said people need to be like open, right, to see what's going on, what other cultures, and crucially, how is the trend in other markets, and how are things developing. So you can't afford to be in a situation like the security uncle in our building, that, I mean, before he realized the change is coming, it's too late. It's too late for him to do anything. And even the government is trying hard to help PMET, but it's still difficult. So I think always have a sense of sort of something might be coming, and be prepared for that. Well, anyway, so probably too much.
Sure. Thank you both for the answers. And maybe in consideration of the time restriction, we just wrap up the discussion with the last question. From considering most of our audience are, students transitioning from university life to business world and young entrepreneurs, do you have any specific tips to offer to them? Maybe not only those interested in the finance or technology industry, but those interested in, public health as well. Yeah, I think Dr. Liang, maybe you want to take that question first.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning public health. I'd like to make a plug for public health and medical care in a way. For the latter, of course, it is a stable rice bowl. Everyone will need medical health, although at some point, AI may replace all the doctors. But certainly around the region, even around the world, you'll see that public health remains very important. And so to add to that, then I'd like to say that it's good to have horizons that's beyond Singapore. Many of my friends who have formed companies have realized, of course, that the Singapore market is too small for them if they do diagnostics companies and others, and they always have to venture out into the region, or else they will always have to be supported by some government grants or other, which is not the proper way to grow a business. And I'll stop here because I'm not a business person in any sense of the word. Thank you.
Sure, maybe Jianggan, you could go next.
I think I've mentioned a few times, just when people are young, just explore different things. And even if you fail, you don't lose much. And opportunity cost will be higher and higher as you grow older and older. Just when you are young, just try many different things. I did my MBA 7 years ago, and so my classmates was sort of, many of them have been in one single career path for 5-6 years, and they just realized that they are stuck. And they go to MBA to find out what's out there, what's outside the some people in like investment banking, they want to find out, I mean, what's like in the industry, in consulting, or in sort of public sector, and some people, but basically people want to find out what's going on and to see that if they've missed anything. And especially for people who work hard, you don't want to be in a situation that you worked very hard for like 10 years, then you realize that you are in a sunset industry. So as usual, I think keep your eyes open, and if you still if you're still like 1 or 2 years away from graduating, use this opportunity to try different internships with different types of companies in different industries. You will get you more exposure, and it will help you make a decision where you want to be when you graduate. And even after you graduate, I think now it's a situation where people can try like different kinds of jobs. So that is something I actually see a little bit different from the people who have interviewed in Singapore versus the people who have interviewed in Indonesia. Indonesians many of them are willing to try whatever. I mean, even if you come from a top university with the top scores, they're willing to try sort of on the ground sales job to see that I mean, of a tech company, to see that what they can do with it. So I think many of the people who interviewed in Singapore still seem to be a bit conservative. They want to go into a job that their parents and their relatives are comfortable with. So, I think nothing wrong with that. But before you decide on a path, just explore as many things as possible. And if you have decided on a path, and if you work hard for that for like 2 to 5 years, still keeping an eye open to see what's there and what are the changes that might be coming.
Sure. Anything to add on, Prof. Wong?
Well, I think Jianggan has said it very well. The only thing I want to add, at least for the younger Singaporean in the audience, is that be more humble. I think there's a tendency for many Singaporeans who have grown up that we are in the first world, that we know better. What we know are the things to do, right? You assume that what works in Singapore is the right thing to do. Yeah? I think you need to be humble to recognize that what we take for granted is not the norm in other countries. So you have to start from scratch and figure out, be prepared to sort of learn what really, will work in these other markets. And you need to have a very deep insight and understanding and knowledge of these other markets. Singapore is just way too small. And so if you just simply assume that things will be like Singapore and expect things to be like Singapore, and expect other people to deal with you like you are familiar with in Singapore, then you will not be able to adapt as well in this multicultural world.
Sure. Thank you, speakers, for the wonderful discussion and the valuable answers. So once again, we would like to, express our appreciation to our distinguished guests for your time and knowledge shared. And I believe this afternoon has been a fruitful learning journey for all of us here. So also, personally, I want to take this opportunity to thank our organizing committee. Without your time, effort, and coordination, it wouldn't be possible for us to hold this event, in such a special setting under the global pandemic situation. And now this marks the end of this afternoon's session. And for the evening, we will be hosting